Month 5 of my grand quest to experience more of what Guild Wars 2's professions have to offer. Time to turn up the heat. For September, I'm playing a profession that's one of my weakest. I've tried several times over the years and just don't click with Mesmer. I could never really seem to do much damage or anything with it, really, and have ended up defeated more times than I can count. It's time to buckle down and learn this purple chaos gremlin of a profession. But I'm not allowed to die. If I die, I have to delete the character. After all, the most logical way to stop myself from dying is to potentially delete weeks of hard work for one simple mistake, forcing myself to start from scratch all over again. But I'm not a psychopath, since I don't understand anything about Mesmer and am not allowed to look up any guides or builds or anything for the challenge. I'm channeling my inner chronomancer and winding it all the way back to level 1, starting leveling up from scratch. The goal is obvious: make it to level 80 without dying, and then play around with elite specializations for the rest of the month, all without dying as well. I made a wonderful Sylvari named with the one thing I always think when I run into a Mesmer in PvP. Aw, no fun. Fought my way out of the dream and got started on my hardcore journey. The absolute first thing I had to do once out of the tutorial is obvious: fashion, baby. After all, how can I expect not to die when I look like a background NPC? But I didn't want to blow 582,000 transmutation charges during this challenge, so I threw on an outfit for a while and got to exploring. As a fresh level 2 Mesmer, the sword was doing well enough, but at this level, literally anything you use, including sneezing, will take down enemies. Whoops, did I say level 2? I meant level 3. No, wait, level 5. Wait, why am I level 10 already? I knew I would be leveling fast since I've played loads of Guild Wars 2, but seriously? Level 10 in 34 minutes? This new adventure guide is absolutely nuts for leveling up characters. By level 10, I had a full row of weapon skills available and decided, in addition to the tried and true greatsword for any necessary ranged combat, I was also going to try out the new Mesmer spear. But as fast and nice as leveling in the open world is, I wanted to experience the Sylvari story because it's been years since I have. Armed with the finest equipment money and karma could buy me with 7 seconds of looking, it was time to go save a Sylvari from rot sap. But the salve I needed was guarded by trolls, but they were no match for my Mesmer's spear. Unfortunately, my spear wouldn't get me through everything quite so easily. Following the threads of my new friend Tiakrin's tragic tale, we faced off against the Nightmare Court, who turned his beloved Isvelta against him and the Grove as a whole, so it was time to put an end to her, to protect my fellow Sylvari. But despite my actual understanding now of Mesmer's spear skills, her and her minions started trashing me. Unfortunately for them, I had my greatsword equipped as well, and with some old-fashioned panic kiting, we won out the day. After the level 10 story quest was over with, I was already almost to level 17 in no time at all. But I figured to celebrate almost dying for the first time, my Mesmer deserved some real classy Sylvari drip. So I spent the time, money, and stones on the tier 1 cultural set. Looking this damn fly, there's no stopping me now. But I barely even had time to enjoy it before level 20. After a bit more exploring of Caledon Forest, I found myself 2 hours and 13 minutes of gameplay into the playthrough, and I was already a quarter of the way to level 80. I jumped back into the Sylvari story, but I was not expecting who I was about to meet. My boy Traherne, of all people. It was really awesome to meet him this early on. Out of all the characters you meet early in the personal stories, establishing a relationship with him now made the rest of the story into the pact and everything working with him that much more fluid and logical. Though it's bittersweet as well anytime I play through the story alongside him. But we can't change the future, so we fought on against the Nightmare Court and met an odd Sylvari named Malik, who really messed up my understanding of the entirety of the Sylvari, but that's a whole lore rabbit hole I'm not prepared to dive into right now. During the push from 20 to 30, I decided to start using some new weapons while keeping either spear or greatsword equipped, since both of those were performing amazingly for me. But staff was definitely no slouch either. In fact, I started to enjoy staff more than greatsword because of all the conditions it was putting out. Combining staff conditions and moveset with the increased shatter skills from the illusions trait line I grabbed first was putting out some hefty damage, especially for longer fights where my conditions could build up. But while I was still learning Mesmer, I put myself to the test by tackling the Great Jungle Worm since it was coming up, and managed to not even go down against it, which felt great. It even prompted me to go tackle the Shadow Behemoth right afterwards, which I also emerged from unscathed. But hilariously, what pushed me over the edge to 30 was crafting, of all things, to finish up the first volume of the adventure guide. This sadly meant that I was rapidly approaching the end of the Sylvari storyline and getting close to the stuff I had played through several times by now. But while testing out the different orders, I got to be part of the team to retrieve Khalidbolg. My friend always used to say Sylvari were the canon race for Guild Wars 2, and honestly, up through Heart of Thorns, I'm starting to agree with him. Getting these early ties to things in the story that become relevant later was awesome, but don't get a big head, plant enthusiasts. Char are still the best race. I'm sorry. After getting Khalidbolg in preparation to deal with the Risen, we tricked some centaurs to be our foot soldiers against the undead in a very Mesmer way, and I charged up the hill, magical sword in hand, ready to take on the world, but the world took me on instead. And at level 37, I had my very first rally of the game, making that the new closest I had ever been to deleting my wonderful new Mesmer, which coincidentally also became the closest I ever wanted to get to deleting my Mesmer in September. Weird how that works, right? But justice prevailed, and with the addition of a few detours for various hearts and events along my travels, by the end of the level 30 story, I had already flown all the way up to level 38. Admittedly, I wasn't terribly excited for more of the story, as I've already finished the Vigil, Whispers, and Priory storylines at least one time apiece. But I do have vivid memories of getting absolutely destroyed during the battle for Claw Island at least the first time through on my warrior way back in the day. So I decided to join the Order of Whispers with my old friend Tybalt Leftpaw once more, and after a quick glow up, I set off to have my heart broken all over again. But along the way, I noticed something I cannot believe I have never noticed sooner. Cortana is in Guild Wars 2. Well, her voice actress, Jen Taylor, is anyway.
How did Landon find me? There's no way the Ministry Guard could have tracked me this far from Divinity's reach.
I've known a lot of famous voice actors are in Guild Wars 2, such as Matt Mercer, Liam O'Brien, Sam Riegel. Hell, the voice actress of Jimmy Neutron even voices Timey. But Halo was a huge part of my childhood, and I am borderline embarrassed it took me this long to notice this. Embarrassment aside, I continued the push up through level 60 with Claw Island in my sights, and it went mostly uneventfully. Well, I mean, there was that one time I decided to join in to fight a Scarlet Briar invasion, missed time to dodge, and maybe got a teensy bit close to dying. But other than that, everything went great. No deleting my character and starting over yet, Miss Briar. I became a full-fledged member of the Order of Whispers, rescued Demi Beetlestone, all the while crushing centaurs, branded, and pirates alike. I conquered all the way from Kessex Hills to Blaze Ridge Steps, finally hitting level 60 and unlocking the battle for Claw Island by eating food? Oh, come on, seriously? But after all that work to unlock the battle for Claw Island, I was having too much fun running around Central Tyria doing map completions, and this whole thing is supposed to be a challenge, sure, but a fun challenge. So I kept on exploring. I decided I would stick with the weapons that have got me this far, but I needed to test out the full array of Mesmer weapons once I hit 80 to share my thoughts. So with Spear, Greatsword, and Staff, I fought my way across Tyria, from Sparkfly Fen all the way to Mount Maelstrom. Spear and Staff in particular were becoming second nature to me, and I was having a blast. Staff gave me that classic Mesmer vibe I always liked to watch but never executed well, of standing back as an army of clones appear, confusing and destroying the opposition. But Spear was the exact opposite, an in-your-face, fast-paced Mesmer. Compared to Staff, where I really enjoyed the results, I really fell in love with the Spear moves. Mind the Gap is an awesome skill with 2 different damage areas, giving some technique to it, and then comboing it with Mental Collapse for a stun and refreshing Mind the Gap so you could do it again was great. Not to mention with imaginary inversion, I barely had to use my heal skill most of the time. But finally, I hit level 80, clocking in at a shocking time of 13 hours and 52 minutes of pretty casually paced play, all things considered. My time was running short for the challenge, however, as it took me 22 days of real life time to get there. What can I say? I'm busy. What was I going to do? I didn't have enough free time to play all the elite specs and get an actual feel for them. I couldn't just look stuff up either. That's not in the spirit of the challenge, but I found a loophole. I hit up a friend of mine who's mained Mesmer since launch and asked if I could play only one elite spec for my challenge. What would he recommend me to try? So with his advice in mind, as much as I was enjoying my core Mesmer spec I designed of illusions, chaos, and dueling, I sacked dueling in favor of Mirage and got started on my new learning curve. Initially, I was excited because I really enjoy Axe anyway, and that's the elite weapon that came with Mirage. But my excitement quickly faded when I realized just what my friend had done to me. See, when I dodge roll, I often find myself using it to roll out of an AoE zone, not just evade the attack as it comes in Dark Souls style. But with Mirage, you can't do that. With Mirage, your dodge just evade cloaks you for a bit, longer than an iframe of a standard dodge, which makes sense as Mirage is supposed to use this to perform their special, stronger ambush skills, and rolling would waste that time. I think this may be one of the first times one of these challenges has just flat out forced me to get better at Guild Wars 2 at a mechanical level and stop wasting my dodges when I don't need to. But now that I picked out my skills and build and got myself in full Celestial gear, as is tradition, it was time to hit the field as a Mirage. Frostfang on my hip and Bifrost on my back, I set forth with Tybalt to finish uncovering the risen threat to Lion's Arch that I already knew the ending to. Axe was a great weapon, carrying plenty of delicious conditions as well as just some fun moves, and paired very well with Torch offhand for even more conditions. Have I mentioned that I love conditions yet? But there was a strange thing about Mirage, and that was how little it changed the overall gameplay flow of Mesmer. While yes, I wasn't focused entirely on clones like my Shatter build was, Shatters were still absolutely critical, as they, among other things, would give me access to my Mirage cloak to dump the powerful ambush abilities onto the enemy. I'm just so used to classes like Engineer and Warrior that feel like they vastly change the way the profession plays at a fundamental level, that this was odd at first, but really nice, because unlike my Engineer for a month challenge, I didn't feel like I had this massive steep learning curve ahead of me. But after some adjustment, the battle for Claw Island loomed ahead of me. I was confident heading in, as I had what I felt was a good understanding of Mesmer at this point, so with Tybalt and Traherne at my side, we cleared the beaches and attempted to warn of the danger, only to be met with deaf ears. But the invasion had only begun. As the abominations covered the walls, I was put to the task of ending their miserable re-existence. These were the bane of my existence, I remember, from years and years ago. My warriors' lack of stuns to clear their frenzy stacks that turned them into unstoppable behemoths was the issue. But now, between massive power creep that's trivialized the core gameplay and my stun and distortion shatter skills, they were no match for me. And I'm definitely sure I could have just soloed the entire army, but history can't be rewritten. My beloved mentor and best char in the game stayed behind and paid the ultimate price. But as sad as it always is, it was time to move on. I grabbed the full arsenal of Mesmer weapons and headed out to do some general map completion and get the feel for the ones I hadn't used yet. Unfortunately, like I said before, Corteria suffers so bad from power creep that you really can't form a real opinion on anything's true effectiveness in it, as a veteran player at least. I needed a level 80 zone. Fortunately, a meta that I wanted to do, Storms of Winter, was coming up, so I took my poor plant girl into the frozen tundra to fight against Jormag's minions and test out some new weapons. But while I was testing, I always made sure to have my staff as an alternate weapon in case things got hairy and I needed an all reliable to clear him out. I wasn't expecting much from the dagger since many elite spec weapons feel pretty flat outside their original builds, but I was pleasantly surprised. Dagger was a really solid power weapon with some good animations on it, and running it as a Mirage, the Phantom Razor ambush skill actually gets some decent conditions going out there too, though not nearly as reliably as other weapons. Not to mention it actually has some decent AoE on it thanks to Unstable Bladestorm and Blade Call. The 1200 range is also really nice. Being able to have distance when doing a hardcore run like this always makes me feel more comfortable. But I needed a good offhand weapon, and pistol became an easy choice for me. Also sharing the 1200 range with Dagger, pistol has a bit of condition and control on it between crippling with Phantasmal Duelist and magic bullets bouncing shenanigans. It felt alright, but it didn't scratch that synergy urge and didn't bring enough to the table for me on its own to work the best. My favorite offhand combo for Dagger ended up being one of my most underused weapons of all time in Guild Wars 2. The Focus's Phantasmal Warden ability is a solid AoE and defensive skill, but it and Dagger's Bladestorm are stupidly good when combined with Temporal Curtain. It was hilariously fun to drop Temporal Curtain and Phantasmal Warden, only to follow up by dragging the enemies into my curtain with Into the Void, and finishing them off with a Bladestorm, and if anything was left after those few seconds, a quick Blade Call to help finish it up. Felt like pulling the enemy into a wonderful Mesmer blender. When Storms of Winter finally popped, I headed out with Dual Sword to test some slice and dice action. Just reading the skills, I was pretty sure this wasn't going to be up my alley for solo PvE anyway. However, I still forged on and tried my best. I cracked on with it for a full 20-minute meta event, but I just can't get behind it. My issue with Sword is that it's just too heavy of a movement and control weapon to feel good for the way I play in PvE. The main combo stacks vulnerability and boon strips, and not even really very well, which can be good, sure, but vuln stacking never feels fun and exciting to me. Blurred Frenzy and Illusionary Riposte are defensive moves, and you can combo Riposte into a Dazing Bolt, which again is cool for PvP, but not so much here. Illusionary Leap is another one that would be much better in PvP, with the clone swap and immobilization being a solid way to set up a combo, but is bordering on unnecessary for PvE. I knew there were other offhands I could try with the sword, but since the 3 main hand skills just didn't spark joy for me either, I just moved on pretty quickly. After all, I had one more main and offhand weapon to test. But the meta event I came to Biora for was over, and I was sick of looking at snow anyway. I remembered that Lake Doric was always brimming with activities, so I headed to Divinity's Reach and went through the portal. But I forgot I'm not allowed to, since I haven't done that portion of the story.
That sign can't stop me because I can't read.
Screw you, guard. I have a teleport scroll. I'm going to Lake Doric. Armed with scepter and shield, I took the fight to the White Mantle. I love the scepter moveset. It just cranks out torment and confusion, and can set up tons of clones quickly too, which worked great for my Mirage, since Shatters give me ambush, and Scepter's ambush slams the enemy with even more confusion and torment. I love dots. However, Scepter has a distinct lack of any AoE efficiency, and I ran into loads of problems with getting swarmed with enemies and not being able to cleave them down fast enough, which I tried to rely on my shield to help me with. Unfortunately, the shield really didn't help that much. Having Echo of Memory and Deja Vu for back-to-back blocks that generate clones as well is absolutely amazing. Don't get me wrong, but it didn't bring enough to the table to make a difference with the swarms. And the Tides of Time AoE, again, is cool and can help stem the tide for a second, but still doesn't do enough. I could see Scepter Shield being a really great condition combo for especially some solo champion stuff, since you can load up the enemy with conditions, tank up for a bit during high damage spots with a shield, generate some clones, and let your conditions do all the work for a bit. In Lake Doric specifically, however, I was getting trashed bad when I had a group jump on me, and Lake Doric is almost nothing but groups of enemies. Greatsword, axe, spear, staff, and torch I already talked about earlier during my journey to level 80, and I never talk about aquatic weapons during these challenges since, honestly, it's pretty pointless. But there is one weapon I haven't touched on yet: Rifle. and that's because I never used it. I was initially really excited when I remembered Mesmer's got rifles, but when I equipped one, I realized the kit is heavily in the support direction, a few skills not even really doing damage, and it just wasn't going to be fun to use for my purposes in this challenge at all, so I sadly put it back on the shelf. I know several of you wonderful adventurers have expressed an interest in me doing weapon tier lists during these videos, but when I started to work on that idea, I just can't make it flow well in a video like this. There's just two separate things for me, but don't worry, I hear you. We'll tackle some weapon tier lists just in other videos. But before I knew it, October was here and my goal was achieved. Not only did I get my Mesmer from 1 to 80 without dying, but I even did plenty of level 80 content, including Storms of Winter, Bog Queen, Tequaddle, Metal Legion Concert, and more without dying. And finally, learned how to play this damn class after all these years, all while having tons of fun along the way. It shed a whole new light on the enigma that is Mesmer for me, so hopefully the next time I see one in PvP, they end up being the ones thinking that the fight was no fun. Who am I kidding? They're still gonna roll me, but hey, maybe I'll recognize the skills they used before getting corpse jumped for once. But speaking of rolling, you made it this far to the video, so I know you'll enjoy rolling your mouse over to the monthly Profession Challenge playlist right here and giving that a click so you can binge watch another 45 minutes of me talking about 4 other professions that I've barely played.